The American Revolution, the new film by Ken Burns, Sarah Botstein, and David Schmidt, this time on the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. Want to bring history to life in your classroom? With Everything is a Primary Source to go, you can borrow real historical artifacts from the last 200 years, shipped right to your school. It's hands-on history, paired with ready-to-use lesson plans and classroom activities that make the past come to life for you and your students. Whether you're teaching the Industrial Revolution all the way up through the Communication Revolution, there's something in our collection for every era. Visit everything-history.com/EPS to go and start transforming your teaching today. That's everything-history.com/EPS to go, because history belongs in your hands. Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where we navigate history through popular culture. I'm your host, Eric Salmonson. I'm a social studies teacher, historian, and pop culture enthusiast. Each episode, I sit down with everyday people to discuss the media, objects, places, and events that shape us and reveal what they say about the past, as well as who we are now. The Everything is a Primary Source podcast is, therefore, your history, my history, our history through popular culture. So welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, a show where we dissect media to learn its historic value. This is a little bit different episode than usual because normally we look at things that were made at least a generation ago. Sometimes we'll even tackle some subjects from the 21st century. But when we do, we rarely have people involved in making it who can speak to the why and the behaviors and ideas are conveyed. So I'm very excited to have two guests today, co-directors, along with somebody you may have heard of in the documentarian field named Ken Burns, for their project, The American Revolution. Today I have Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt joining me, co-directors of this project. And this was the better part of a decade in the making, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yep.
We were finishing work on the Vietnam War in December of 2015, and Ken had this eureka moment where he said, "Hey, I want to go back and make the American Revolution." We've all worked on some other things, and in the meantime, the pipeline had some stuff we had to get through, but our attention has been partially and then fully on the 18th century for a very long time.
Which is a bit of a diversion, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I've always enjoyed Ken Burns documentaries. I love the style of them. I, like a lot of people, Civil War was what did it for me. I was about 9 years old when that aired. It was a family event. We watched it. I learned so much about it. And that documentary in particular, and all of his others, have been with me. Obviously, I didn't apply for teaching jobs when I was 9, but that idea to become a social studies teacher, that inspiration was there, and that was a major component of that. And then as I became a teacher, these documentaries have always been along for the supplemental ride. It's been such a wonderful thing having it there. I imagine that the American Revolution, we don't have the photographs like the Civil War. That's the first like media war.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Don't have obviously the footage or anything like that. Was making the American Revolution, therefore, I mean, we don't even have like sketches usually of ordinary people. The only paintings we have from the era are usually of people of status.
Yep. So that definitely did present a problem. I mean, there are some oil paintings, oil on canvas, that you might think about, or that you don't even know about, that we were able to find and put in the film, of, you know, more people than you might think had their portraits painted, but it's still a very, very small subsection of the population. It's the people who had the time to afford to sit for a painting. It's definitely the people who could afford the expensive inks, you know, and the artistry. So there's not that many portraits from the time period. There's a lot of very famous historical paintings, some of that hang in the Capitol Rotunda that we might know, but there's not that many that were painted by people who witnessed it. There are a fair amount. All of them we've seen. Many of them, most of them probably are in the film. Not the necessarily the portraits, but definitely the history paintings. But there's all sorts of other choices that we could make once we had this scarcity. It presented a lot of opportunities for us. And I think, Sarah is really eloquent on talking about this. So if you don't mind, Sarah, I want to turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think visualizing history before the advent of photography is really interesting. And when we started, everybody on our team will probably make fun of me because I'm the most not we're all real big history nerds, but I get very anxious that people think that whatever we're showing is the actual thing so specifically that it scared me that everything we were showing was represented after if it wasn't, a document or a map or something that was contemporaneous, a few lithographs or etchings that were done for newspapers at the time. So what we did was we brought everything in, and David was fairly convincing, as was, our editors, like, let's just see. And then it actually helped me understand the history to see how the paintings have changed over time, how the events have been understood by our country, by countries around the world. And we sort of like the live cinematography, we kept saying to ourselves, it can't just be one sunset after another, one tavern after another. How are we going to handle reenactors? How are we going to handle the living history museums? How are we going to handle the crafts? And so over the decade of thinking about it and the 5 or 6 years of making the film, we kind of got better as we went. We could see what was working, what wasn't. We stripped down how we were using the paintings, which paintings we were using, how we were talking about them, and married them to the live cinematography. And whenever there was, I remember we just kept saying this to our editors, when there is text, when there is someone's name, when there is a gravestone, when there is a backyard, when there is something that gets you close to the actual person, we're going to start there. And then we're going to go out from there, and we're going to hopefully, Ken was very smart about this. The introduction of the film is about 9 minutes long, and it sets the stage as much for the history we're going to tell you as all the visual elements we're going to expose you to. So it's like a visual table of contents. And I always turn to Ken or David, I'm like, this is the dawn of America. That's how I read the intro. Like, America's waking up, and here is how we're going to tell your story.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see it personally. And whenever I show any of these documentaries, any of the Ken Burns or throughout the entire catalog to my classes, I always say to them, what you're looking at basically is a multimedia version of an essay or a book. That it's does what a good historian is meant to do, and that's contextualize, provide both primary and secondary sources and interpret those, have a thesis, have some kind of argument that you're making. So it's not just here's this what happened on this day and this what happened this.
Right. I mean, I think the backbone of any film we do and you're a history teacher, right? The backbone is here are the dates, here are the facts, here is what happened, mostly in order. We don't work thematically. We don't work in little siloed parts of history. We're telling big, complicated stories, and we usually march through them chronologically. But then we rely on historians living today, archival materials, and then people from the past, really famous names like George Washington, Cornwallis, Thomas Jefferson, and people you've never heard of, to be the voices around those dry dates and facts.
Mm-hmm. The film we worked on most recently together, Sarah and I, and she's worked on many films since then. I've worked on one film since then, but the last film we worked on together was the Vietnam War. And there's such a wealth of documentary material about that war that we could still be in the archives, no problem. There's a tyranny of choice there as much as there is a tyranny of not choice here. But one thing we learned making that film, and then we had the luxury of filming witnesses to that war. And we talked to people who were on all sides of that conflict or were observers to what was going on overseas who lived in the United States at the time. I think that helped us find the chorus of the cast of this film too, because there are so many sources. There's so much source material out there, so many primary sources of people and their memories of the war, their observations at the time, or their memoirs after, their general orders, newspaper reports. All of that is a lot of that has survived, has been preserved, has recently been scanned and is easy to find and search and much more easy anyway. I mean, it still took a long time and a lot of work to do, but it's something that we are able to do because a lot of other people have done a lot of work um, over the 250 years to bring them to today's attention. But what you find is that somebody like Joseph Plum Martin, who wrote, in my opinion, the best book about the American Revolution, his experience was really similar to somebody like Roger Harris in the Vietnam War.
Right.
Roger Harris talks about mud, blood, and artillery at Cantienne. Joseph Plum Martin basically says the same stuff about his experience at Fort Mifflin off Philadelphia. So, I think that experience was great because we couldn't obviously interview um, people who survived the revolution because they may have survived the revolution, but they are no longer surviving, of course. And therefore, what did they leave behind that feels like a war? Well, we had that experience. We could find it and put it forward.
I think I've worked on 3 of the 4 big series that Ken has done about war. Worked on the Second World War and then Vietnam, as David was talking about, and then this. And I think I've talked a lot about why I'm really glad to have worked on those 3 films in that order and to examine these huge world-changing events in that order.
I'm assuming this is another reason why this one seems a bit different, but also the similar to the Vietnam War. I mean, we've already went over the reasons why this one's different. It's 18th century. You don't have any moving pictures, all those different details. You had to use reenactors this time, which is not a normal thing for this kind of documentary. But the bottom up approach, the American
Right.
Revolution, that whole era, and we could debate when it began, when it ended. The war is just part of it, right? Historians say 1763, the end of the French.
Right.
But they couldn't agree with each other when the dates were. So
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? Every world war, every big conflict, every war, Annette Gordon-Reed said to us recently on a panel, war changes everything. So just remember that. The aftermath is totally different from the preamble, A. And B, I mean, I think that's, it's, when wars start and when they end is also super complicated. And those are the things that take us the longest to figure out. So there's no question that 1763 is wildly important. And 1787 and 1789 and 1803 and 1812 are really important. So you can keep going with, how to start and how to end. And we don't do that till the very end.
I'm glad. And I think that's another reason why this one is unique already, even before it's come out, that you have all these different things. But I love the because that conflict, the revolution, and just the whole that era is usually top down. It's usually George Washington, John Jefferson, the elites, and that's really, when we look at it pragmatically, that's why that, because there have been other uprisings in colonial history. Century before, there was Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia. There had little skirmishes in my home state of New Hampshire. There was the Pine Tree Riot in 40 years before the Revolutionary War. But the reason why this one happened is because all the cross section of the country was finally in sync with each other, that they understood each other, or I guess
a cross section of it was together, right? Because there's loyalists that have as varied a coalition too. I mean, it's a really fascinating story.
But that way we get that something, because Vietnam, on the other hand, is usually studied from the bottom up. Most people learning about tell you General Westmoreland, that name. They might know.
Okay, so not to interrupt you, but to interrupt you. So war, we've talked a lot about this too. 2 things you have to do when you're doing stories about war, I think, are really make sure people understand the leadership, because the leadership is having huge consequences to the people fighting the war and on the ground where the war is being fought. So you can't really tell a full story of war without both. And you can't really tell a good story about war without empathy, context, and understanding. And I've been using those words a lot. And that doesn't mean there isn't right and wrong and good and bad, and not everything is gray, but you need to put people in their historic context so that viewers and students and people can understand them and then be able to make judgment.
It's it's all one big, like when I even something as simple as my homeworks that I give my students, right? We make sure that we hit all those different things, primary sources and secondary sources. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I categorize that way. Oftentimes the primary sources that relate to leadership is a lot more official. It has oftentimes it can be it's clear that there's education involved in what the person's producing, that they have a it's in letters, it's in diaries, things like that. But then we also use, and then you can see from other people that a lot of their primary sources are not as maybe traditional or sophisticated. It's used items. It's maybe just some kind of like uh,
A
object.
muster roll.
Right.
I'm curious, David, what you think. Is David, just to go back to Vietnam and Revolution, David is much more the researcher than me. And one of the things he and I worked on a lot in making Vietnam is like, okay, what are the books saying the numbers and the facts and the things are, and what are the primary sources, and trying to tie them together. Made him crazy, but also was super interesting. And then the same thing here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you?
Well, I mean, numbers, I can't deal with numbers. I used to be really good at math, and since Vietnam, when it was, um, almost a tactic to inflate numbers, um, I don't trust them in the context of casualties. So, you know, if you've got varying points of view or different tallies, you always have to say, according to this person's number, or you have to say, or you have to kind of triangulate the numbers because something says 6,000, something says 4,000. You have to say at least 4,000. So anyway, numbers are just killer, and that's the primary sources are for something like that where you probably should go unless a secondary source counted several different things. I just want to pivot for a second, which is George Washington is the character in this film who you hear from the most. And it occurred to me today that he's the most famous person in American history, if not the most famous, certainly one of the most famous. Like that's incontrovertible. What did the average person know that he ever said? And it's probably I can never tell a lie, which is a lie. He never said that, you know. Is
Or
there
the
anything
cherry
else?
tree. Not that
Right.
he
Is there
said, but it's like he
anything
chopped
else?
down a
It's
tree.
weird.
Right.
Yeah, he's like famously quiet and all this stuff, but he's not. He's written tons of stuff. And you were talking about how the primary sources that come from the leadership or from the famous people, the elites tend to be officious. And there's definitely that. There's the general orders, there's the stuff he's writing to Congress, there's, his requests for support, there's his battle reports, all that. But there's also the letters he's writing to his brother that are like, we're gonna lose this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not, we're able to showcase the work and elevate the work of other people who have dug into the archives and found all that and brought it together and digitized it. Everything that we know, that humanity knows that exists, that George Washington wrote, has been documented and digitized, most of it footnoted, and available online. That is so cool. But because he's George Washington, everybody's kept those letters. So they're centrally located. And it's like, I don't blame past teachers of history for sticking to Benjamin Franklin and George Washington because that's the stuff that's most available. But we benefit from the work of so many other people who have found Joseph Plum Martin, who've refound Joseph Plum Martin, have reprinted his book, have gotten that in front of the world, or the New York Historical Society that has John Greenwood's pages, or the Colonial Williamsburg Library that has Betsy Ambler's. These voices, North America in 1775 was incredibly varied in its population, but it was also really literate, far more so than I ever realized. Somebody in our film says that the population in North America is the most literate society in the world besides Scandinavia. And all these people knew they were living through history, and a lot of people wrote it down. So there's just a lot of primary sources out there, and it's a dream for somebody who just wants to find the story.
As a fellow educator, I know that taking our social studies classes to historical sites and museums can be a rewarding experience for everyone involved. But between coordinating transportation, keeping track of permission slips, and paying out of pocket for unforeseen expenses, it can also be a large task for a busy teacher. The Everything is a Primary Source to Go artifact borrowing service replicates the most engaging part of a museum field trip, and that's interacting with real historic objects directly in your classroom, but without the process and cost of taking your class off campus. The Everything is a Primary Source archive contains ephemera and physical objects dating from the 1820s onward, with emphasis on the 20th century. Pre-made and curated kits pull from the collection and are designed to complement your curriculum, just as the exhibits at your favorite cultural center do. Visit everything-history.com to learn more about EPS to Go and how it can help you bring the museum to your classroom. The culture of the time, it was very much a print culture. Everybody was excited and encouraged to read their newspapers, to read bulletins, to write necessarily part of the upper echelon of society. That it was very democratic in that way. Just to kind of understand my mindset here. So the title of my teaching method, which is also my podcast, Everything is a Primary Source,
Right.
is putting out the idea that even when we make things that are secondary sources, like a documentary, it speaks volumes. It can be looked at as
Totally.
a way. And so what you're saying about all this access that we have and all these people who are doing the work already, just their own passion projects, it could be a local history or heritage society, somebody who is down in the archives, just constantly, managing it and getting inspired. I just went to a conference this past last week in New York, and I met up with a woman who's been for the last several years writing a history about a enslaved woman on Long Island named Liz, who and she wrote a whole book about it. And during the Revolutionary War, she was kind of like part of the spy syndicate out in Setauket area. And so I caught up with her again this year. So I talked to her last year, and she had all this body of research. The first thing she says to me this year when I went to the conference is, I learned about somebody new, right? I in such archives, and I found this new piece, and suddenly this person's like alive. That's not something that could have happened very easily, even 100. So we live in this great, fantastic time where people are digitizing things. There's access to places that have before, and you also have these juggernauts of documentary filmmaking called PBS and company.
Well, I mean, you're saying everything is a primary source. If that's the case, there's an awful lot of noise out there. But if you are media literate, you can find those things that your colleague found. And you can find like-minded people that are really interested in telling this story right. And we are super grateful that, PBS is a trusted brand, and a lot of people were willing to offer generously of their time and expertise to us to make sure that we got this right. So it's a collaboration of an awful lot of people to get this film together. I was just again thinking of your Everything as a Primary Source. If that's the case, then I think it's Parson Weems who's the one who comes up with the cherry tree and the I cannot tell a lie. So Parson Weems is a primary source. He's just not really. I mean, he's just embellishing a little bit as he does so, but it tells you something about early 19th century America that he did that, right?
All of our images that we get, and a lot of those paintings, I mean, plenty of them were done in the time period.
Right. But they're all necessarily afterwards, right? You can't paint a battle during the battle.
And so, and in that era of artwork, there was a lot of storytelling, symbology embedded into it, just the way that, so here in New Hampshire, we have the governor the royal governor, pre-Revolutionary War governor, was Benning Wentworth, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
state house and at his mansion in Portsmouth. And when I teach my local history class, we analyze this painting, which, yes, it's a full image of this governor, this royal governor, but you can see in the background perfectly placed pine trees because that was where he got his wealth, was the, forests in New Hampshire. And you see the ships in the background in the harbor, which those trees were turning into ships, hence, and he's in between them. He's standing on this like checkerboard looking floor, which I don't know. And there's a column next to him. He was in office for 30 years. So, like that column, stability, the checkered floor kind of looks like chess. He had to be so. And when I asked the question to my students, I'm like, who is this made for? In an era where they had printing, they would print prints, but this painting, who is it meant for? And they always say accurately, the future. It's not meant for now. It's for the future to learn about this guy. So, George Washington leaning against the cannon,
Mm-hmm.
or our famous pictures that have been reproduced over and over again. I don't even know where I got this, but I have this is from Miller High Life, their series of American stories, and this is the signing of the Declaration of Independence in beer tray form, but have been reproduced over and over and over again, and therefore maybe have lost their original what they're conveying. But every time they're a primary source of that era.
Yeah. So Trumbull's painting of the signing of the Declaration, very famous. Not all of those people were in the room at the same time, right? So it's already, but we're gonna use it. It's telling the story. Um,
Crossing the
the
Delaware.
yeah, crossing the Delaware. The death of
That
the
was
death of
Pearson.
the death of I'm thinking of Warren on Bunker Hill.
Oh yeah.
There's so much stuff happening all at once. It's because you only have one instant in painting, right? We, as in a documentary with 12 hours, can go backwards and can go through time. It all has to happen at once in that thing. And Sarah, you should talk about the crossing the Delaware, which is a later thing. But wow.
Well, no, it was such a great, Maya Jasanoff says in the opening of the film, one of the reasons that we maybe don't know as much about the American Revolution as a country as we should is because we've so mythologized this time and encrusted it with such sentimentality, as Ken has been saying, and that we have this origin story that is sort of unreal and detached. And the great painting we thought to put for her saying that is Washington crossing the Delaware. It's painted after the war by a German painter. It's in the bright daylight. A lot that's going on in that painting is not accurate to what happened in
He's
that event.
standing up in the boat. Who does
Well,
that?
we did find out he would not be standing up, but the people around him would have been standing up. He might not have been. Like, there's
funny.
we went and did an event with Washington crossing the Delaware, and we learned all about those boats. So we realized we've been saying somewhat the right thing, but not entirely the right thing, which is good. We're always learning. Jinx. So anyway, we put that painting there because that is like the big heroic painting that every kid sees. And to your point of media literacy, okay, I think it's really fun. I have an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old. They will love, like, oh my God, Mom, that's not actually right. Do you know what would have had? It excites people to learn more about our history.
It's a great, like you said before, it's a pathway. It's a conversation.
Yeah.
You can go literally take a tour of that painting and identify what is trying to be communicated here. And that painting, I think 1830s, I think was that one was done.
That sounds right to me.
That sounds right to me too.
That's a primary source of 1830s.
Right.
I do this. I haven't done it in a while because I haven't taught government in a while. But when I was teaching government class, I would have the students look at, for some reason, the Trumbull painting of the Declaration of Independence is really the one that's used. I mean, it's always been the one, but there are several paintings of the Constitution, Constitutional Convention. You can find, I think there's this website that I would use that had like 20 of them, and they span all the different eras. And most of them have very similar layout to the Trumbull Declaration of Independence. Washington on the right hand side, either sitting or standing at the president's chair with the setting sun or the rising sun, as Franklin said.
Yeah.
And you can spot throughout the country's history how all the different figures, like for example, there's an 1870s one which has Benjamin Franklin on his feet, which he probably couldn't have done very easily
with his gout and at his age. Yeah.
He's on his feet pointing up, and he's probably telling the story about the rising sun. And I'm like, well, that's in an era that's the second industrial revolution. Scientists, science, new inventions. This guy's an inventor. He's a scientist. Of course, he's the champion of that era. They want to highlight him. You moved ahead to the 1930s. And probably the most famous constitutional painting of the 1930s and into the 40s is the Christie one, with a Washington almost identical pose as him crossing the Delaware, but in Independence Hall doing that stance. And here's Washington maybe not being the man himself, but the city managing the Depression, right? Everybody looking at him. He has almost a glow behind him. Like he is the hero. He's the one that's saving everybody from, because then you look at another painting from, I think, 1933, Washington is at the same part of the room. It's a very gloomy picture. It's dark in color. He's slumped over. He's just kind of like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. And it's like every time anything about the founders comes up in media, whether it be a painting, a movie, a television show, I need to ask, who's the voice of George Washington? Who did you select to be that?
Josh Brolin was a hard voice to cast. We actually was one of the last things we did.
Why did you land on Josh Brolin? If I'm not mistaken, didn't he play President Bush in W?
In W? I think he did.
So, we had a lot of people read for him. He's kind of famously a little bit opaque and unknowable, right? That's what all the biographers say about him. So you needed someone who had enormous gravitas, but also a little distance, and have it be kind of interior read. And Ken was flying back from Europe, and we were almost done recording. As David said earlier, there are more George Washington quotes than any other historic figure, I think. And he saw Dune 2, and he called when he landed and said, I think we should bring in Josh Brolin. And we were like, okay, let's do it. And we brought in Josh Brolin, and he walked in and he was like, I'm going to be what? And it was a really fun session, and he's perfect for it, I think, in the end of the day. He's perfect for it.
And he was playing another revolutionary in Dune 2, so even better.
But, I will say the cast in this, there are 61 actors who read for us over about a year and a half to 2 years of recording voices. And whether it's Matthew Rhys as Thomas Paine, or Ed Norton as Benjamin Rush, and Abigail Adams as Claire Danes, and Sir Kenneth Branagh, and Tobias Menzies, and some younger actors, Alden Ehrenreich, Joe Keery, Maya Hawke. It's Amanda Gorman reads for us, Sam Jackson, more. I mean, it's a pretty amazing cast, and they all had a lot of fun. They would come in for an hour, really nerd out with us, and leave. And a lot of them it's different, and we're so excited for the country to try to figure out who's who.
Yeah.
A more grown-up version of Liberty's Kids, the cartoon that to kind of bring things around. I'm treating this thing that even has yet to come out as a document of now, and put it in line with all the other versions of American revolutionary stories. I think about the Burnsian, the Ken Burns, style of filmmaking. The Brooklyn Bridge came out just before the centennial of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Statue of Liberty came out just before the bicentennial or the centennial of that statue, which was a celebration of the Constitution. The Congress was made just before the bicentennial of the Congress taking to session. But then started with the Civil War, and then baseball, and then so many of the other documentaries throughout the 90s and the early 2000s into the present day. There doesn't seem to be, we're making this to bring attention to some milestone year.
No,
Right.
and I
Nor did this one
actually,
begin that way.
that this didn't begin that way. It's an accident. I mean, we're not living under a rock. So a few years ago, we realized we were going to dovetail into this, and there were some early discussions about whether we might want to run in the spring of 25, not 75, because of the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. We couldn't make that date for a number of reasons. I'm so happy we're in the fall, but we're a little ahead of everything that's going to happen in 26, and that's really good for us. It's really good for PBS. It's really good for classrooms around the country because it's not just the film, right? There's educational materials that started launching this week, and even some that launched earlier around Constitution Day in September. But I do want to say, I think even those early films were, some of those anniversaries were also happy accidents. That's not what motivated Ken to make those films. And so we have had incredible luck over 40 years of finding anniversaries. And when we were making Vietnam, 2015 came and went, which was a fall of Saigon moment. And we just, sometimes those things dovetail and it's great, and sometimes they don't, and we can't get too distracted by those anniversaries, I think.
And I just like that's not, it didn't have much to do with why we made it or anything like that, but I do think that there's something said about the American people revisiting this history every 50 years. And certainly we're pretty familiar with the bicentennial because Sarah lived it a little bit, Ken lived it more, and I've seen the quarters and all the footage, and it was a real important memory for so many people that I understand it. But the same thing happened in 1926 and 1876 and 1826. So I think that we again, not intentionally, but are hitting a moment when people are want to do this again.
Yeah.
So that's cool. We're excited about that.
Hoping if nothing else, it does the same thing that the bicentennial does, and your film will be part of this, is inspire people to take an interest in maybe not even that time period. I look back
Yeah.
to 1970,
Uh,
and there's so many different, like Roots, the movie came, the miniseries came out shortly after the bicentennial.
Hmm.
It's like real acute awareness of just all of American history.
Right. I
Little
was reading an article about how the um, country is dealing with 250, and the states that are not the original 13, particularly I would say the states west of the Mississippi, because the revolution affected much of basically all of North America, but really east of the Mississippi. But the states west of the Mississippi are dealing with other aspects of American history, not 250 years ago, but they're just using 250 as a, you know, 250 should include all 250 where they are. I like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of energy around all sorts of, not just even American history, about history, because history matters.
it's a
yeah.
I can say that with a surety because that's my extending it to people. And on that subject, I am excited to hear that, and this might have to do with your biggest fans, social studies teachers. I'm excited to learn that this will be coming out not only with a companion book,
Hmm.
but
That's
also
out.
a DVD and even a Blu-ray, which
Hmm.
is not a usual thing for something that is on streaming. Is that in part, at least, because that teachers want to use this in the classroom?
We also have lots of resources for teachers that are separate from those, whole lesson plans. I think 3 dozen or so that capture different aspects of the revolution, both the war and the political and social moments that are happening at the same time. Um, so that's really where we're thinking about the teachers and stuff. But yeah, we want this to be in libraries and on for teachers to be able to have access to it. When I was a kid, watched the Civil War on VHS in both eighth and 11th grade. So I know the value of this. It's why you talked about being inspired by the Civil War. Certainly I was too, to tell American history. So yeah, we want to pay that forward.
I deeply believe in reaching back to our founders for inspiration. I think this film is deeply inspirational. I think it will make Americans of all types and kinds hopefully feel a sense of patriotism and excitement about some of the things we've done well and how we have, inspired to make good on some of the promises that we haven't kept and haven't done well. And, I think I really deeply believe in a free and fair media that's accessible to everyone, and in the mission of public television and PBS and our teachers, especially now.
I also think people, the more and more we talk about this, the more people we talk to, the more people who come up to me and say, I can't believe this, I can't wait for this, the more I realize Americans know the revolution matters, and they know they don't know the revolution. And so this is their opportunity to really get some context about the few things that they do know. We're not disproving what they already know, but we're giving them much more context to make it make sense. I know that for me personally, which this last 10 years is learning this has been incredibly transformative. It makes me love my country much more, even while I understand
Right.
the suffering that it took to make this country become this country.
In some of the promotional material I saw, it was put very well that this is it sets the tone. It's laying the groundwork for American culture, and that is to be always thinking about revolution, and sometimes the very upfront ones that we can definitely see, but that in other times it's quiet revolutions that just kind of take place without people even realizing it. But that whole concept of independence and speaking up for oneself and all the things that it's part of our identity as Americans. And regardless of when you joined this group called Americans, it seems to be part of our spirit. So it really, yeah, this documentary will remind us of that. I'm imagining it will remind us that every other time, whether it was clearly pointing back to 1776 or just embedded into the way that we live our everyday lives as Americans, that behind it is this whole era.
Yeah. It's a foundational moment that is self-evident, but again, I didn't understand it, and understanding it better. I don't know. It's easier to feel those things that you're hoping people feel, I think. I don't think we need to be afraid of this history, but I do think it's useful to learn. This is absolutely not a reason for making this by any means, but I'm thinking right now, Thanksgiving is coming up. There's not that many safe topics. You can talk about sports, you can talk about weather. Maybe we have shared history we can talk about too. This matters for all of us. We share it. It belongs to everybody, and we made it for everybody, and it's free for everybody, and it will be available when you have a few days off during Thanksgiving. If you don't catch it on when it initially airs, the 16th through the 21st on PBS.
It's the ultimate in true popular culture. I mean, that's what this is all about, is things that we can all connect with. And I'm just so glad that I love that the serendipity of it. If it wasn't say, hey, we got to do this for the 22, and I won't try and pronounce the word semisesquicentennial.
Semisesquicentennial.
I'll get for
I've
you,
gotten
Sarah.
good at it. Yeah.
I say 250.
Yeah.
I go with that because
Semisesquicentennial. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Google has helped me a lot over the times. I'm like, I'm about to type this word out, but I'm just going to check, and yeah, I'm just going to say 250th as well.
I'm gonna live a long time, just so it'll be easier to say tricentennial.
And this is our chance, hopefully, to reflect. And I thank you so much for
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, thank you for your attention and your time.
Yeah. Hope you enjoy it.
So David and Sarah, thank you so much for making this for us. I can't wait to watch it.
Great.
Everybody listening, remember, you're listening to the EPS podcast, where everything, including the American Revolution, the documentary series, is a primary source. We'll talk to you next time. Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything is a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.